basically,
Thank you very much.
we're gonna have 1 hour, and then this presentation is available on prezi.com. But I wish to present this as a presentation, a proper presentation. Okay, while we wait as well, I'm just gonna tell you about how I wish to run this talk, which is I want to hear more from you rather than a monologue from me, because I think this is a very exciting topic for all of us. And I'm just gonna explain my paper, which is published in 2018 something 2018 in contemporary politics, and this one is the presentation. So please raise your question if you wish to ask some questions to me or to clarify my talking maybe not too clear or something, right? Yeah, can you see this well, the first page? Perfecto. Okay, now the title of the presentation is Women's Representation in Asian Parliaments. So we're looking at how women fare in this parliament, I mean the current, the most recent period. So the study was part of my PhD project, looking at a comparative perspective from Asia. So my study is basically on Indonesia, but I have a chapter just talking about Asian region as a comparative perspective. Let us begin. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Oh, no. Sorry, glitch. I need to stop and then change this one. Apologies. All right. Okay, now we're working. Okay. So, as I've mentioned earlier, the study applies quantitative approach, but I'm also a huge fan of qualitative approach. So for me, both camps are helpful as long as you can answer the question with them. Either it's qualitative or quantitative. So let me begin with the overview or the introduction for this chapter, the paper. So this paper examines the relationship between socioeconomic development, corruption, level of democracy, and women's representation in contemporary Asia. So for those who haven't got the opportunity to read the literature on this topic, I'm just gonna give you some snapshots of this topic. So studies have argued that economic development offers women new opportunities, new resources to participate in politics, meaning that the more advanced in terms of economic development of a country, the more women will be participating in politics. However, my study finds that in contrast to these expectations of modernization theory, this paper finds that national economic variables do not account effectively for the level of women in parliament. And then it's also going to demonstrate that there are variables that might be useful to explain how many women in parliament based on the combination of variables. So the approach might be something different than you've heard before in terms of quantitative approach. So I'll guide you through this step by step. So as I said earlier, I'm a lecturer at Pinus University, one of the best universities in Indonesia, obviously one of the best in Jakarta, and then honorary research fellow at University of Western Australia. And first questions first, why Asia? Okay, why Asia? Because 50% of women living in Asia, yeah, correct. But there's something more important than the figure itself. So the growth of women's parliamentary representation in Asia is far slower than any other regions in the world. It only moves about 5.3%, from only 5.3%. Sorry, the change is 5% from 13% in 95 to 18% in 2015. So the report from Interparliamentary Union suggests that we only grew 5%, okay? So this is the graph for the overall worldwide growth in terms of women's representation over the years. So we're looking at some jumps coming up in, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, growing faster and quicker. I mean, bigger and quicker in terms of Asia. And then we only defeat the Pacific region, and that's it. We are the losers among other regions in the world. Modernizing Asia, while we have this Asia becoming, tigers of the economy in the world, prime example for this is, of course, South Korea. But overall, the Asia's economic growth within 50 years have soared from only 12% of the GDP, world GDP in the 60s to 31% in 2015. And giving East Asia a subcontinent as the biggest reduction in terms of the Human Development Index gap, suggesting that there's been a huge modernization and it's been successful so far in Asia. However, inequality is as a pertinent issue in Asia. Why? Because nations like Sri Lanka and Thailand, who already had this universal suffrage, which means men and women can vote or stand for an election, granted long time ago in 1930s, but women there only comprise 6% of seats in their national assemblies. While the younger democracies such as Timor-Leste and Taiwan are leading the path, like having almost 40% of lawmakers being female. So what are the contributions of this paper? So I'm drawing upon previous research on women's legislative representation in Asia. My research contributes to the scholarly literature in two ways. First of all, it shows that there are multiple different paths that leading to the percentage of women's representation in parliament. So we call it equifinality. I don't want to get you into the jargon. I'm just going to do this very layman statement, okay? So it's going to be very easy to digest. So it means rather than, if you use regression, you're looking at one or two variables that might be useful in explaining an outcome, right? But using this approach, we're looking at different paths. So it's like something that you're looking at the existence of one variable and the non-existence of another variable, and the resulting is different. And what country is using that path? So number two is that it contributes in a way that we're looking at a combination of variables to explain women's representation in parliament. So rather only combinations of different conditions, we here look into different variables that can be combined as a path to explain a country's performance in terms of electing women to parliament. So where do we begin? We begin by investigating a previous study by Stockhamus, one of the prominent scholars in this topic, Daniel Stockhamus. And his observation was on African parliaments. So I used the same variables that he used for African parliaments, and then I tested out with the Asian parliament. Let me tell you about, yes, the literature review might not be this details. I tried not to be too detailed. I'm just gonna explain the most important information that you need to know about this topic. So socioeconomic development, yes, some scholars suggesting that socioeconomic development does matter. The higher the education, the higher the participation in the workforce, the more likely women will be participating in the political arena. So variables to be measured. Sorry. What was that? Did you hear that? Did you hear something? I just heard something, some music just pop in.
Everything was fine for us. We couldn't hear anything. Sorry. Everything was working okay.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay, no worries.
Sorry. And then, yes, how to measure the socioeconomic development? We measure by looking at the GDP. We're looking at the education attainment, leadership, and participation. So the GDP, here's the Asian context. The increase of GDP per capita leads to improvement in men's and women's basic equity of quality of life, right? The higher the GDP per capita, of course, the quality of life will be improved. Also, gender equality has declined in primary school enrollment and labor participation, as well as political leadership. As well as the time of the writing. At the time of the writing, there are at least 12 women have led Asian countries, including those who govern Muslim majority countries such as Indonesia and Bangladesh. Jaywira argues that South Korea and other Asian countries such as Pakistan and Nepal, there's no significant difference between those with low literacy or higher literacy. And another debate in this topic is about culture. Does culture matter? So some say yes, some say not really. So the biggest names in this culture matters is Ronald Inglehart and Pippa Norris. So they basically argue that egalitarian values are significant to improve women's access to office. So in order to measure these egalitarian attitudes, scholars use female to male labor force participation, looking at their participation. Are they, participating equally or not? And also they suggest about religiosity. So attitudes towards women vary among adherents of different religions, but in particular, they argue that Muslim dominant societies are commonly characterized by fewer female MPs. So another important literature is about how Ross in 2008 includes the percentage of Muslim population and women's participation in the labor force. And he suggests that Islam itself is not a good explanation of any gender inequality. Similarly, Seguin in 2010 argued that it's not really about the religion maybe, but it's something else. And then what about the system? Yes, the PR electoral systems, many have argued that the system is more friendly towards women rather than the majoritarian system. And then gender quotas, of course, significantly improving women's representation across the world. And there's no doubt that political institutions in Asian democracies are varied, right? So we're having countries with gender quotas, some are not gender quota, they don't have gender quota, or the PR electoral system, or basically limited democracy as well we have in Asia. So probably one of the key variable is to measure the democracy. So I use the Freedom House to look into women's participation and the influence of democracy. So what about Asia? So in Asia, countries that granted women the right to vote and to stand for election was as early as 1918. Right? These countries include Georgia and Kyrgyzstan, but they have fewer female MPs compared to United Arab Emirates, got it mixed, who only granted the universal suffrage in 2006. So this empirical evidence suggests that maybe democracy is not always, a recipe for having more women in parliament. So what is then? The last aspect is corruption. This is very, very debatable because I found the literature is a bit, divided in terms of, is it because of the corruption as a good, indicator or variables to be measured when we're looking at women's representation. So corruption was first coined by scholars at the World Bank because they argue that the higher rates of female participation in parliament associated with lower corruption incidents or cases. So in that regards, they argue from the World Bank's perspectives, of course, they need more women in politics because women are the agent of change, etc. However, other scholars suggest that corruption itself deters women from political engagement or from running for electoral office because it becomes prohibitively expensive for women to participate and to compete with other contestants in the elections. Excellent studies done by Jarnegaard in 2013 and Stanstrom and Wagner in 2016. Lastly, Campbell and Sa has also observed Asia and the Pacific reveals that only democracy has reached a point of maturity, then it may result a lower level of corruption. So it cannot stand by itself. So what about Indonesia? All right. So the current study on Indonesia suggests that the stricter gender quota laws improves nomination. Yes, more women being nominated, right? But at the same time, we're looking at rampant practices of corruption and vote buying. So having that in place, we cannot solely relying on gender quotas. So here goes the data. So I have 47 countries in Asia to be analyzed, and I'm looking at their single or lower House of Parliament at a single point of time. And then the data was collected as of the late 2016, right? And so those countries which data, incomplete data, such as North Korea, Hong Kong, and State of Palestine, was excluded from this analysis. So the method, it's called Qualitative Comparative Analysis. Qualitative here is not the qualitative as you understood, the observation or the investigation on narratives, but qualitative here is about looking at the membership level of every case, right? And then you compare their membership and looking at which path that can explain the result. So it is an analytic technique which combines quantitative and qualitative methodologies where you're looking at the theories about certain aspect to be observed. And then it serves as a bridge to get to bridge the gap between case-oriented and variable-oriented. So you're looking at how to explain a case, but as well as looking at the variables. And then QCA enables researchers to examine similarities and differences across many cases while preserving the integrity of cases as complex configurations. So it's quite a novel approach in political science, I have to admit. I think I got rejected twice for this paper, probably because of, unfamiliarity of the method. But in marketing studies, it's been hugely applied. So QCA uses the logic of set relations to address causal complexity. So the outcomes do not arise from just one single cause, but rather a combination of conditions. So it uses the Boolean algorithm rather than just linear algebra. It is quite one of the cons from this approach is that we only can use a small number of cases, less than 50 cases, to be ideal in using this method. So studies on women's representation which applied QCA include Crook 2010 and Liliefeld 2012. So these are the only two political scientists that use a QCA technique to assess how combinations of different factors can produce similar outcomes. So I think this one makes me the third, I think. And then I start with the regression, right? So I did the regression analysis first, and then I did the QCA, the second stage. So the multiple regression analysis suggests that only gender quotas, okay, the provision of gender quotas and the existence of a PR electoral system offer the positive and significant effect on women's share in legislatures. So it is expected that if a country is imposing gender quota and applying the PR electoral system, then the women's share in parliament will increase by 10 and 6% respectively. So 10% for having gender quota and 6% for having PR system. So this is the result. If you use regression, so we're looking at out of 7 variables, which is GDP, democracy, corruption, PR system, quotas, Muslim population, and labor force participation. There are only PR and the quota system that are helpful in explaining the outcome. Now, the second method is fuzzy set QCA, right? So fuzzy set or FSQCA assumes most relationships are asymmetrical rather than symmetrical. So high values for X associated with high values for Y. So this method focuses on testing the configuration. So testing the configuration and recognize that variability in data is important to determine the levels of membership in a set. So where do each country belongs, right? So we have conditions or factors to be observed. There are 7 conditions. So GDP abbreviated by G, Muslim by M, labor force by L, and then PR system by P, quota is Q, and democracy is D, and corruption is C. So the full membership means when this case, where a country is being, so we name the country as a case, right? So the case is a fully membership of being a high GDP if the country has the highest GDP. So this is full membership, right? So those countries with lower GDP, they will be more likely to be non-membership. Right? So in this case, we have Afghanistan with that GDP, so full non-membership in terms of high GDP, while Qatar is full membership here. And then the crossover is the equifinality, the middle one, the middle between these 2 sets of membership. There are some points where you say democracy, for example, as non-membership because it's even lower than 0, which is -1. We still put that in the system, and the QCA will do the calculation in terms of the memberships. So we call this as FSQCA scoring or calibration to identify key ingredients in explaining women's high or low share in parliament. So the findings, let me give you an analog of, this is the analogy for QCA, right? FSQCA is like you cooking a fried rice, okay? If you wish to cook a fried rice, probably Laura's style is different to mine because I will not have sausages, for example, right? Or I don't have cheese, so I don't use cheese in my fried rice, but it's still a fried rice. You know what I mean? So what we're looking at here is the first one here is the high representation, right? So what explains membership in terms of high women's representation in parliament? So high here means above the crossover score, as you've seen before, that the full membership is the biggest share, which is owned by Timor-Leste when the study was conducted. And then the lowest one is 0. I'll show you in the next slide because this is for the high representation, right? So let's see for Timor-Leste. The recipe to have high representation is, I'll read it out for you. The path is path number 6. So the capital means the existence, and the lower letter is the non-existence or the non-membership position, right? So low G means low GDP, right? And lower M, lower letter M means it's not a Muslim majority country. And then L stands for labor force. Women are not really significantly participating in the labor force. P is the existence of a PR system. Q is the existence of a quota system. And then D is quite significant score in terms of democracy, and C is low perception of corruption. Oh, sorry. C is the capital C is low perception. The smaller C means the high perception of corruption, meaning that people consider corruption is as a something that is frequently happening. So considered to be less transparent. The country is considered to be less transparent. So this is a recipe for Timor-Leste with the consistency 1. So this is the exact consistency 1. This is their path. What about other countries such as, let's say, Singapore? Singapore and Taiwan sharing the same path number 5, which is not a Muslim country. They have no PR system, but they have significant representation of women in the labor force, and they have a quota. This is, there are 2 types of quota, right? First is the legislated quota. So every party needs to nominate certain number of women or certain percentage of women as candidates. That's a legislated one. Without that, the party cannot participate maybe, or they will have some consequences. And the second type of gender quota is the party gender quota. So each party may apply their own, a standard for nominating women, at least 20% or 30% by the party itself. So it only abide the party, not the whole party who participate. So the path number 5 explains Taiwan and Singapore. So they have high GDP, they have high democracy index, they have quota, they have labor force participation, and they have a rather transparent governance. So they have that kind of path to reach the high representation. And the solution consistency is quite high. It's quite promising, 0.8, and the coverage is 75%. So when you saw the solution coverage, it means how many cases can be explained correctly with these recipes. So it's almost 75% of the cases explained using this recipe of path. And what about the low representation? All right, as the study was conducted using the data back in 2016, Indonesian parliament at that time only had 18% of women in parliament, right? So that's considered to be low in terms of representation. And the recipe, let's see the consistency that reached 1, yeah? It's path number 4 and path number 5. So Sri Lanka can be explained by these paths. Low GDP, not a Muslim country, low representation in labor force, no quota, and it's a rather corrupt country, but a high democracy. So these are the paths to explain what is Sri Lanka, what the Sri Lanka has in terms of low representation. So this is the path for them. But you can see that there's a significant difference with path number 5, which is the existence of P, right? Sri Lanka shared this path with Turkey, because Turkey has the PR system, PR electoral system, while in India, they don't have that PR electoral system, and high in terms of democracy index, right? So consistency one is basically perfect, like a very exact path. Let's look into path number one. This is how to explain Indonesia. So what we're looking at here is that we have a Muslim-dominated country, yeah, with low GDP, and then significant labor force participation. There is quota being applied, but the country is rather corrupt, according to the index in terms of corruption. So this explains what kind of path that Indonesia has in terms of getting the result of low representation. So if you're being critical looking at the queue exists as a present, right? So we have gender quota, yes, but we don't have the desired outcome, right? So that raises a question about maybe quota alone is not sufficient, because in the countries where they apply gender quotas, the result is still low. So something needs to be done, because we cannot, as I said again, we cannot rely on gender quota itself. If we have that small c, means you have corruption, rampant corruption. That probably the path that is going to hinder women to achieve the legislative office. And yeah, similarly, countries in the Middle East, like path number 6, we're looking at Muslim countries, yes, and then quite transparent in terms of the perception of corruption. It's quite good, considered to be a transparent governance, but they don't have PR system, they don't have quota, and democracy level is quite low. So the path number 6 explains that if you don't have P, D, and P, Q, and D, which is PR system, quota, and democracy, it is very likely that this path is going to bring you into a low representation. So what I'm saying here is that we're interested in looking at different paths, right? We're looking at a combination of variables instead of just one or two, like we do in regression. So where do we go from here, having that kind of, different combinations of conditions resulting in different outcomes? So the results presented have the potential to expand the discussion about political representation by unpacking different routes that lead to women's high and low share in Asian assemblies or parliaments. So in general, the findings demonstrate that the opportunity to improve research, there is huge opportunity for us to improve the research on this particular field by combining the qualitative and quantitative approaches. Also, it suggests that in combination with other factors or conditions, one factor alone is not sufficient in producing an outcome. So the presence of a condition is not a guarantee that a certain outcome will always be achieved, as we've seen from Indonesian case. And yes, this is time for questions. I'm very happy to take questions from the floor. Thank you so much for your patience and your listening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ella. I would like that please you feel free to unmute yourselves and make your questions, or otherwise you can also write them on the chat and I will be happy to read them for Ella.
Hi. May I ask questions for Ella?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very interesting presentations and very interesting method. To be honest, it's kind of a new method for me. So if I'm not mistaken, it's like the method that you are using is kind of bridging between quantitative perspective, purely quantitative, and as well as the other one with purely qualitative, comparative method with the qualitatives. So since it's the new method for me, I'm going to ask a methodological aspect from your papers. Since you mentioned that the study is cross-sectional study, so you only measure one point of a time. So I'm wondering whether you also anticipate the result of your research if you're using longitudinal data, whether because I mean it might have different outcome, or because longitudinal data you can see the trend which is in few or several time period of time between these countries. That's the first. And the second, in your presentation you also show us about the path for Singapore and Taiwan. This country are considered as a country with high level of women representations. And I'm just wondering, because in your slide before, the path for these two countries are capital D. So I'm wondering about Singapore. Why Singapore is considered as high democracy in your result? Because I don't know. I mean, I just wondering about Singapore there, and also in terms of Sri Lanka in low level of female representations. Sri Lanka is considered in two paths, right? In 5 and 6, if I'm not mistaken. So why Sri Lanka can have two different paths at the same time? Okay, that's my question, Ella. Thank you so much.
Im is my co-author. So she always asks the question that is making me because she's always giving me a headache. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. She's very, very critical, so that's why I need her. Yes, excellent question. In QCA, as I mentioned before, the ideal number of cases is less than 50, right? If you look into contemporary politics about using the same method about female as head of government, they use, the author used different years, right? But they code it as a case. Like for example, Indonesia in 2000 is coded as one case. And then Indonesia as in 1995, they coded as a case. So you can do that, right? As long as the number of the cases is less than 50. Otherwise, it's too cramped for the system to measure accurately. So in QCA, obviously, more specific in the fuzzy set QCA, so there are Cripps set. So the outcome is yes or no, or so only options of yes or no outcomes, or that is Cripps set. While the fuzzy set is where you have numbers. So that's why they call it fuzzy, because the outcome is not just yes and no. But the rule of thumb is no more than 50 cases to be observed using this method. So yes, we can use multi-years into the analysis as long as we make every year of observation is a different case. So one particular country in 1 year as one case. That's the answer to your first question. And then the second one is, and I said, I have to agree with you that the result will be different because you're looking at different cases again, like Indonesia in 2000, Indonesia in 2000 and sorry, in 2004 and 2009 might have different level of women's representation, right? So it's a yes. And then the second one is when you look into, let me start with the hardest question first, okay? Singapore, why is Singapore considered to be democratic? I don't know, darling, but the data from the Freedom and the Transparent International, because I use the Freedom House to measure the democratic level of each country. So I use the same source as Stockholm's paper, exactly like that. So they perceived Singapore as a country with a higher, level of democracy. So that's the explanation for that. It's very debatable. I agree with you. As I said, that it's not really democracy in a sense, lack of competition in political arena, etc. And it's a family rule, isn't it? The government is family affiliated. And then Sri Lanka. Why are we looking at? Let me share that again. Why are we looking at Sri Lanka having two paths at the same time with a consistency level as at 1? So can you please look into the the difference here is the existence of P, right? If path number 5, you're looking at the presence of PR electoral system in Sri Lanka as it has, right? The country has a PR system that in line with Turkey. I repeat, because of the presence of the PR electoral system, this path is shared with Turkey, right? Sri Lanka shared the 4th path without P being present there with India, because India doesn't have a PR electoral system. So that's how we look at the outcomes for Sri Lanka is a bit unique because it shares just a slightly difference in terms of variable, but obviously because of the presence of the PR electoral system, that's why Sri Lanka re-emerged in path 5 and shared it with Turkey. I hope I answered your question, darling.
Yep. Thank you.
Otherwise, we can discuss it on WhatsApp.
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, please?
Yeah, well, maybe I can ask something.
Okay.
I think that it was super interesting. Thank you very much. I find that it is a very smart way of comparing different situations, different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to know, from your point of view, if we wanted to include European countries, for instance, to this study, would we use the same features to compare them? Would we need to compare, because obviously, as you said at the beginning, the cultures are very different and might have an influence as well.
Yeah.
So how would you include European countries also in this kind of comparison?
Yeah. Excellent. I think we always need to start from the literature. So I start finding the variables by looking at the literature, like what has been discussed in this particular field. So the literature suggests that we can predict the outcome of women's representation in parliament based on, like Stockholm's paper is about these seven variables, right? For that to be applied in Europe, I think we need to consult the literature in Europe, number 1. Number 2, we've seen parties in France, for example, or in Germany, for example, where they have a very distinctive political parties in terms of ideology. So there's a probability of using that And we cannot do that in Asian context because we don't have a really reliable data on parties' ideology. So in European context, I think I've seen some literature suggesting that those parties leaning towards the left is more likely to support and to encourage women to be active and participating in politics. So I'm suggesting that maybe that variable needs to be included in this similar method. And then probably other factors that are useful to be included. Again, I need to refer back to the literature because different continents or different regions might have different explanation to it. And as you said, yes, maybe GDP is not too distinct between countries, so that's not going to be very useful in this comparative analysis. Mm.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Someone else would like to ask a question?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
So, first of all, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. And
Thank
I
you.
would, yeah, of course. Because I'm not too much into the details, I'm wondering how we can apply those facts to the daily life and how we could encourage women in Asia to go into politics, which is a really huge question, but still.
I guess that's a 6 million question, isn't it? Yes, I mean, the interests are there, Joanna, to be honest. The interests of women to participate in politics, yes, we do have such interests, aspirations, and, well, we studied politics, right? But there are, you know, other factors that is just beyond our reach. For example, the rampant corruption, how prohibitively expensive it is to run. Also, in another paper, I discussed about factors that make women will never get the top list of the ballot sheet. So it is about 70% of those elected are those in the first list of their party list in the ballot sheet, right? But parties put a price tag on it, literally, quite literally. Like they're asking for substantial, you know, donations for the party. And it's just too expensive for commoners to pay for it, just to get the ticket, just to get the list, right? To be on top of the others on the list. That's number one. And it's been hugely known about this. Number two is the rampant practices of vote buying. So even if you got that, you know, the first position, but if the other competitors manage to pay or to, you know, buy the votes from the voters, then yeah, you will not win. So it's quite traumatic for women to participate in politics in that sense because it's very expensive. And we don't really see parties that are genuinely you know, encouraging women as a cadre, like, you know, from scratch. They start from young and, you know, participate in politics, blah, 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 and becoming the top leaders or the top position, managerial positions. No, we don't see that. So there's so many weaknesses in terms of our systems in encouraging women to participate in politics, yes, to be honest. But how to make women participate and willing to run is that I think we need to support women. Like, but unfortunately, I always hear that all the time. I always hear that all the time because women are more critical towards other women. So it's harder. Yeah, it's hard to win female constituents because they're more critical towards you. You know, some legislators discussed this with me in our interview session, suggesting that it's harder to convince women voters because they're more critical. They're hard to, how do you call it? they're very loyal. Once they decided to choose someone, they're very loyal. But to become who they vote for is very difficult. So I'm saying this that maybe we need to support women, support more women to get elected. That's the first start, and then reduce the practice of rampant vote buy, which is, I don't know, with this system, the PR electoral system enables everybody on the list to win a seat, right? Because we don't wait until the number of the list. So the position doesn't really matter. That's what I'm saying. So you can be nominated at number 8, but if you got the vote, the majority of the vote, you win, right? The question is, how did you get the vote? Is it genuinely because people liking you, or is it because you pay for them to vote for you? So it's really hard and very heartbreaking, really, to see that even incumbents as well as finding it really hard to maintain their seats.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's hard to hear.
Yeah. What about in France? I'm really keen to hear about your opinion on in France. What's happening there? Is it also about corruption? I hope not.
So, well, I'm from Germany. I only
Okay.
moved like for 3 weeks now. But what
Okay.
I say about Germany, it's pretty similar when you compare male networks to female networks.
Yeah.
I find that female networks don't even exist, or when they do, they are kind of more often jealous of the, and this is what's keeping women from success, basically. It depends, but it's what you said. But still, I mean, we have Angela Merkel.
Yeah. She's very powerful.
That's true. But yeah, you can also find here that, for example, the appearance of a woman depends, that determines her political outcome, one can say. So often more judged because of her appearance. But still, I have the impression that we have also a lot of women going into politics in Germany. I don't know friends for France, to be honest. Maybe somebody else can
can share the experience in France. Maybe Audi or Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
I don't really know the difference in the representation of women in politics, but they are for sure lower than the men. And I think it's kind of more or less the same I don't know, scheme as the one in Germany. It's kind of the I don't know how we say, but like the success of other women are seen as bad, so it's not really helpful. But yeah, it's changing, I think, now. The society is changing, and there is more solidarity between women, and I think it's a conscious that the society is taking to be equal and to have the right to be equal with men.
Yeah, I think, well, because students at Venus University also needs to listen to this to give some hope in our own hearts, suggesting that we're having these similarities in terms of, having women's representation in Parliament, I think. Yeah. Lucy, I think I want to hear from you if you want to.
Well, I'm not an expert at all on this subject. It was really interesting because, well, I do not know much about it, but like, if I can give just my own opinion, but really it's not an expert, so don't take it for sure something. Well, I don't know much about parliament, but I do know, like, for mayors or something like that, in politics in general, we do have some women that are kind of famous, or like we do know about them. Like
Okay.
maybe in small cities, like I'm really talking about mayors here, it's not really parliament, but for small cities, maybe more use of like men and not much women. But when it comes maybe to higher levels, like parliament or maybe like big cities and everything, we do kind of vote for women and everything. So we do can accept having women that lead us or that can vote and kind of higher positions in the parliament or mayors. So it's still, I think we still have many things to work on in France, obviously.
Yeah.
It's not like a perfect equality and everyone can participate and everything, but I do think we still kind of are getting used of with some women. Maybe that's still kind of, some of them are still maybe in like lower ranks and men are still kind of the top of the list or something. But we do have some kind of famous female personalities, let's say, that we kind of we do know about them. I'm thinking about a few names, but like just the mayor, for example, and in Lille, the mayor is a woman, and she's kind of a bit famous. We do know her. She's a famous political figure in France. So I think, she's been here for so long. And in Paris as well, some mayors in the kind of different neighbors are women as well. We do know them. Or we also have Christine Lagarde, maybe if you do know her about her. Like we do have famous political female. So I think for parliament, it's just a matter of time, but I think it can only, I hope it can only improve. Well, that's my point.
Maybe after the pandemic.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Or how is it, Laura? Okay. Questions from Jakarta? No? Pena, maybe? Or we're gonna close down our session? How would you like it to be, Laura?
I mean, if there are more questions, we can still ask one more questions. We've been already 1 hour, so there is time for one more question, if you wish.
Going once. Going twice.
I just would like maybe to add, like well, I think also we talked about Germany, we talked about France. In terms of Spain, for instance, that it's my country and I kind of know it a bit better. I think that things are moving very fast. We have more and more women representing, representative women in politics.
Yeah.
And I think that more and more they're taking their place. And that mentality in general in society is changing, but we still need to do a lot. But I think that things are very different now, and I don't know, 10 years ago. They've really changed. And I think that every country, depending on many factors and circumstances, has its own path, its own rhythm as well, to evolve faster or slower. But still, I'm very optimistic, and I think that equality is closer than before, for sure.
Yeah.
So maybe just to close with that optimistic comment.
Optimist. Okay. If there's no question, maybe we can conclude and close the meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much again for this explanation, for your time, and also thank you to all of you for making it possible or for attending, even if it's already the weekend for you.
Yes. It's a long night now.
Yeah, exactly.
The weekend night.
Perfect. So it was amazing. It was really great. Thank you so much. And we are looking forward to keeping collaborating together and to maybe organize other conferences and activities together.
Yeah. I have a colleague reminding me, don't forget the photo. Photo everyone.
Photo everyone. So
Let's
everyone,
go.
that's a great idea. We should,
Yes.
we should
Anyone, please turn on your camera, please. I want to see your beautiful faces. Come on. Yay. Hello there. Hello.
Hello.
Pak Satrio, next we need to get a speaker from Lille, right? And to talk.
We do have already.
Yay! Yeah. I will come.
Please do.
Well done. Oh, the one who is suggesting me to take a photo cannot open his own camera. You silly. Okay, who's gonna take a photo? Me or Laura? Or
I think that we should all take, so we can later share them and choose the best one.
Okay. Okay,
Please,
get ready.
Okay. So. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you too.
And take care.
Take care. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and see you soon. Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Au revoir.
Have a good
Au
day or
revoir.
evening.
Au revoir. Au
Au revoir.
revoir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.